Have you ever imagined witnessing a scene in which all seemed lost, and suddenly a four-legged hero appears to completely change fate? Do you believe that a dog threw himself into a violent current and managed to save the life of a child who was about to drown? This true story took place in the United States and has moved people around the world, not only for the intensity of the moment, but for what it reveals about courage, instinct, and the true power of loyalty. Stay with me until the end, because what you will discover now may surprise you and perhaps even change the way you see the relationship between humans and animals. It was a seemingly ordinary day, one of those in which tranquility seems to dominate the landscape. The sun reflected in the waters of a river that cut through a small American town, and a family took advantage of the calm to spend moments together. There was nothing to indicate that such a peaceful scenario was about to become the scene of a situation of extreme danger. Have you ever been through this? A moment when, in a matter of seconds, the unexpected took over and left everyone without a reaction. Because that's exactly what happened. The child played near the shore, innocent, curious, delighted with the movement of the water. For the parents, it was just another happy moment, another record of childhood. But in the blink of an eye, joy gave way to panic, a simple slip, a rapid fall, and suddenly the little body was carried away by the force of the current. The silence of the day was broken by cries of despair. The parents' hearts raced. The feeling of helplessness took over, and time seemed to freeze before the real threat of losing what they loved most. And it is precisely here that the story takes an unexpected, almost unbelievable turn. While the adults tried to react, there was someone carefully watching their every move, someone who did not think twice in the face of danger. The family dog, who was always nearby, immediately realized the seriousness of the situation. His eyes fixed on the child, his instincts were triggered, and in a few seconds he made the decision that would change everything. What would you do if you saw the life of the one you love being dragged mercilessly through the water? What seemed impossible to many was for him a non-negotiable call to act. Imagine the scene, the strong current, the icy water, the parents paralyzed by fear, and that animal rushing towards the shore, barking with all its might, as if to warn everyone that there would be no time for hesitation. Every second was crucial. There was no plan, no guarantee of success, only the pure courage and protective instinct that are part of the essence of a dog. And it is at this point that the narrative gains even more strength, because we are talking about a decision that goes beyond the survival instinct. We are facing an act of pure loyalty, unconditional love, bravery that only those who have been saved by an animal can describe. What was about to happen would not only be a fight against the current, but a direct confrontation with the impossible. A medium-sized dog, faced with the fury of the waters, launching itself without hesitation to reach a defenseless child. Can you visualize this scene? Can you feel the weight of tension in the air, the quickened breathing of those who watched without being able to intervene, and at the same time the hope emerging in the form of that unlikely hero? This is the essence of this story, a moment when the fine line between life and tragedy was crossed by an act of courage that no one expected. And this is where the real journey begins, because the dog's dive into the current was only the first step of a rescue that would be forever marked in the memory of everyone who witnessed it. And the most impressive thing is that throughout this episode, we are not only facing an animal acting on instinct, we are facing an invisible but incredibly powerful bond between a dog and his family. A bond that goes beyond words, that transcends logical explanations, and that makes us question how far a dog's ability to protect those it loves goes. This story is not just about a rescue, but about living proof that heroes can show up where we least expect them. And what follows will show in detail how this dog braved the current, how he fought against all odds, and how he turned a day of dread into a day of hope. Want to know how it all happened? So stick with me, because the most exciting part of this story is yet to come. And maybe while you listen to this story, something inside you will also move. After all, who has never come across moments when courage seems to come from where it is least expected? It may be that you have already experienced something similar, or perhaps you have a dog that in some way has also demonstrated that protective instinct that thrills and surprises. If this topic makes sense to you, leave here in the comments what touched you the most so far. I really want to know your opinion, to know your experience, because each story further enriches this conversation and strengthens this community that grows together around stories that inspire. And since you are here following every detail, take the opportunity to leave your like in this video. It may seem like a simple gesture, but it is precisely this small action that shows me that this content makes a difference and motivates me to continue bringing stories capable of exciting and awakening reflections. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people who, just like you, connect with narratives that reveal the most beautiful side of life. And of course, if you are not yet part of this community, subscribe to the channel. Thus you guarantee that you will closely follow each new story, each new four-legged hero, or each powerful lesson that life presents us. The inscription is the link that keeps us together in this journey of discoveries and emotions, and it is what allows this space to continue to exist and reach those who need to hear messages like this. Now take a deep breath and get ready, because the scene that comes next will put you even closer to the current, the look of that dog, and the moment when everything could have ended in a tragic way, but took another turn thanks to an unexpected decision. That scene of tension and courage gains even more strength when we go back in time a little and understand who the people behind this story were. In a small American town, surrounded by landscapes that mix tranquility and the brute force of nature, lived a simple family, those who find happiness in the details of everyday life. The scenery was marked by a river that cut through the region like a living vein, bringing coolness on hot days and serving as a meeting point for residents. It was a river that, while offering beauty and leisure, carried in its waters a hidden truth that it could turn into an unpredictable danger at any moment. The city had narrow streets, wooden houses, flowering gardens, and a rhythm of life that seemed to slow down time. Many believed that living there was like being part of a bubble of serenity, away from the hustle and bustle of large metropolises. But, as in every small community, there were secrets kept behind the scenes and stories of overcoming that went unnoticed until an unexpected event brought them to light. It was in this scenario that this family built their journey. They were ordinary people, but with a mentality focused on what really matters: unity, mutual care, and the search for a quiet life. The father worked in a local workshop, known for honesty and daily effort. The mother was dedicated to the home and the education of the child, transmitting values that went beyond words, showing in practice what respect, compassion, and resilience mean. And the child, full of energy, carried in his eyes the curiosity that turns every detail into discovery. It was that kind of child who runs after butterflies, who is enchanted by the noise of the wind among the trees, and who turns even a stone found on the riverbank into a treasure worthy of being kept. But there was someone else who completed this family nucleus: a dog. He was not just a playmate, but an inseparable part of everyday life. Present at all times, he made the house a livelier, more joyful, and in a way safer space. It was that friend who was always there, lying at the foot of the sofa while the family watched a movie, running along with the child in the yard, or lying on the balcony as a silent guardian of the hearth. His presence conveyed peace and at the same time firmness, as if saying without words that he was there to protect. The bond between the child and the dog was something that went beyond simple conviviality. They shared a tune that was hard to explain, but easy to feel. Anyone who looked from the outside would notice in the glow of the eyes of the two a special connection. Often a gesture, a look was enough, and they already understood each other. The child invented games, and the dog participated in all, always patient, as if he knew that he was part of something bigger. It wasn't just friendship, it was a life partnership. This invisible but incredibly powerful link is one of the greatest revelations of this story. With each run across the lawn, with each barefoot dip on the riverbank, with each clumsy hug of the child wrapping around the dog's neck, a connection was forming that would prepare the two to face moments far greater than any play. This deep bond is what many would call destiny, but it can also be seen as the silent impact of the choices and experiences that shape our existence. The dog seemed to carry within itself a silent responsibility, almost as if it was aware that this little human depended on it. His instincts always kept him on his toes, and even in the midst of the banter, his eyes remained alert. The child, on the other hand, saw in him more than an animal. He saw a friend, a guardian, an adventure partner. This relationship of mutual trust was so strong that it seemed to transcend language barriers. And that's exactly why, when the unexpected happened, the dog's reaction was immediate. He didn't need command. He didn't need encouragement. It was enough to realize the danger to act. But before we reach this decisive moment, it is important to turn our eyes again to the environment in which everything unfolded. The river, which was a source of pride for the city, was also feared. There were reports from residents who had already seen their fury on days of heavy rain, when the waters overflowed and washed away everything in their path. It was as if the river had two faces, the calm that enchanted and the power that frightened. The parents knew these risks, but like every human being, they also trusted the routine, believing that that day would be just another one of peace. It was a clear, sunny afternoon, one of those in which the blue sky seems to have no end. The child ran happily near the shore, laughing loudly, with the dog next to him, following his every step. The sound of birds mingled with the light waves crashing against the stones, creating an almost poetic atmosphere. The parents, a few meters away, watched the scene, talking among themselves, believing they were facing a simple moment of happiness. It's just that life has an unexpected way of reminding us that behind the quiet appearance, there is always the possibility of sudden transformation. Fate often keeps silent events capable of completely changing the perspective of a family, revealing hidden truths about courage, instinct, and love. And it is precisely in this contrast between the ordinary and the extraordinary that the strength of this story lies. Because before the scream, before the dive, before the fight against the current, there was only one family living their day, believing that the world was under control. It is in this duality that the greatest lessons are found. Behind the scenes of routine, there are hidden experiences capable of teaching us about decisions, about the greatness of loyalty, and about the impact of bonds that cannot be broken. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter, because to understand the background of this family is to understand that nothing happened by chance. Every gesture of affection, every moment shared, every walk by the river built the foundation so that, in the instant of danger, the dog became more than a companion. It became a true hero. This is not just a narrative about an accident or a rescue. It's also about mindset, about how small actions shape big destinies. The dog didn't just act on instinct. He acted because there was a bond forged in years of living together. And the child, who had so often felt protected by him, that day would need this protection even more intensely. When we think about it, we realize that we are facing something much bigger than a simple, exciting story. We are facing a revelation that unconditional love can manifest itself in the most critical moments and change the course of everything. The family may not have had a conscience, but that bond was their true strength, which would sustain them in the face of the unexpected. This silent preparation, invisible to inattentive eyes, is what gives meaning to everything that would come later. Because it wasn't just the current that challenged that family. It was life, showing that heroes can emerge in the most unlikely forms, and that even the most peaceful scenarios hide evidence capable of revealing the true meaning of courage. Comments on, "I'm on this journey too." The day was marked by an almost hypnotic tranquility, of those that deceive the heart and make you believe that nothing can go wrong. The sun reflected off the water with intensity, creating golden patterns that seemed to dance over the surface like tiny liquid flames. The wind blew lightly, swaying the treetops and spreading the damp smell of earth, mixed with freshly fallen leaves. It was a scenario that invited peace, but that hid behind the scenes an uncontrollable force, as if nature had kept a secret to reveal at the least expected moment. The child, fascinated by this natural spectacle, drew closer and closer to the shore, carried away by the pure curiosity of those who see in the world only fun. The smile stamped on his face revealed innocence, while the little feet touched the ground in a hurry, as if each step was a new discovery. The dog followed her closely, attentive as it always did. His eyes shone like beacons, following the movements of the little human he considered his world. Nothing seemed to indicate that in a matter of seconds, the lull would turn into a nightmare. The parents, a few meters behind, watched with the false security of those who believe that everything is under control. They chatted, laughed softly, confident that that afternoon would be just another happy memory. Little did they know that fate was already preparing the ground for a moment capable of changing the course of their lives forever. That piece of the river, seemingly serene, hid in its depths a treacherous current. It was as if nature itself, in silence, had set up an invisible trap, ready to be triggered. The soft sound of water lapping against the stones masked their true strength. Anyone looking from the outside would see only a quiet flow, but beneath that clear surface lurked a relentless energy, ready to drag away whatever dared to get in its way. The child, not imagining the danger, took a few more steps. He laughed out loud, playing with his own shadow reflected in the water, trying to touch with his small hands that golden glow that the sun scattered. All it took was a slip, a minimal imbalance, and what was a joke turned into a tragedy foretold. The foot found a slime-covered stone, the body leaned forward, and gravity did the rest. In a matter of an instant, the child fell into the river. The shock of the cold water ripped the air from her lungs, and before she could react, the current pulled her with devastating force. The sound of children's laughter immediately disappeared, replaced by panicked screams. What was just an ordinary afternoon now became a brutal struggle for survival. The parents' hearts froze. The whole world seemed to shrink around them, and all that existed was the child's body being carried away by the merciless waters. Within seconds, the situation becomes critical, and it's not a metaphor. In seconds, reality compresses and expands at the same time. For those who watch, time drags on like an eternity. Every fraction of a second weighs tons. For those who are swept away by the current, everything happens too fast, like a whirlwind that does not even give room to think. Parents rushed towards the shore, desperate, but each step seemed too slow, ineffective, useless. The distance between them and the child increased unforgivingly. The heart raced, the breath came short, and the mind filled with horrible images: fear, loss, helplessness. The dog barked loudly, a sound that cut through the air like a siren. It was not an ordinary bark. It was a call to life, a clear warning that something terrible was happening. His eyes followed the child precisely, and the whole body trembled with the urgency of the moment. He paced back and forth, looking for angles, sniffing out danger, as if ready to launch himself. The current, however, was fierce. With each movement, he dragged the child further into the middle, deeper, further. The contrast was brutal. Minutes before, nature looked like a perfect painting. Now it revealed its cruelest face, reminding everyone that in the blink of an eye, everything can change. It is in these moments that we understand our fragility in the face of the power of the world. No technology, no human strength or knowledge seemed sufficient to compete with that raging body of water. What remained was the naked truth. Either something extraordinary would happen, or tragedy would become inevitable. It was as if life had put everyone on the brink of an invisible abyss, testing not only physical limits, but courage, faith, and the essence of the survival instinct. The mother's scream echoed through the air, cutting through the scene like a blade of despair. It was a visceral sound, a mixture of panic and anticipated pain. The father, overcome by adrenaline, rushed closer to the shore, but the slippery mud betrayed him. His feet sank, his knees gave way, and every attempt to advance seemed thwarted. It was as if the environment itself conspired against any rescue. Nature, which until then seemed generous, now showed sharp teeth. Still, giving up was not an option. Every second, the water carried the child further, and the feeling of powerlessness tore hearts. The dog, unable to stand still, moved forward and backward, restless, growling at the current as if it could intimidate it. He felt the weight of that moment and knew, somehow, that he needed to act. This scene, more than an accident, was a revelation. Sudden decisions have the power to redefine entire destinies. There was no room for long calculations or detailed reasoning. There was only the urgency to decide. The river, now turbulent, seemed to mock human frailty. The noise of the water swallowed the screams, turning them into echoless noises. It was as if nature itself tested that family, throwing them into an invisible arena where courage and instinct were the only possible weapons. Parents stretched out their arms, called for help, begged for a miracle, but the current went on mercilessly, dragging without respite, and every meter traveled by the child was a blow against hope. That moment wasn't just an accident. It was a brutal revelation, a demonstration of how life can change direction when we least expect it. A second before, there was security, laughter, and tranquility. A second later, there was panic, helplessness, and the real threat of losing everything. This duality is the essence of existence. The line between calm and chaos is thinner than we usually imagine. The child, not fully understanding gravity, fought the water instinctively. His hands beat, his feet fluttered, seeking any invisible support. The body struggled, driven by the pure desire to breathe, to survive. Parents, stuck on the sidelines, watched the horror before their eyes, feeling that each failed attempt brought them closer to the worst. And the dog, silent witness to everything, carried within him a decision that would forever change the outcome of that story. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter, because this moment of danger was not just about a child slipping in a river. It was about how life exposes us to hidden truths that we insist on ignoring, that we have no control over everything, that at any moment we can be tested, and that even in absolute powerlessness, there can still be room for acts of courage capable of redefining our journey. It is in these invisible backstage, in those seconds when all seems lost, that the greatest revelations are born, those that transform fear into action and fragility into an unexpected force. He said, "That makes sense to me." The cry of the child echoed through the river, mixed with the roar of the current, but to the parents it seemed the most deafening sound they had ever heard in their entire lives. The feeling was that time had broken into 1,000 pieces, as if every second was an overwhelming weight that did not allow to think, only to feel despair in its rawest form. The mother rushed to the edge of the bank with wide eyes, trembling legs and outstretched hands, as if by some miracle she could reach her son, who was already being washed away by the waters. The father, seized by a mixture of instinct and helplessness, was advancing just behind, trying to keep his feet steady on that slippery floor, but each step was like fighting against an invisible wall. The scene was transforming before their eyes, at such a brutal speed that there was no room for reasoning. There was only the shock and pain of seeing the life of his own son trickling like water between his fingers. Panic gripped the mother's chest. His voice, heavy with despair, tore the air in cries for help that seemed to find no answer. She cried out for help, but the river, indifferent, swallowed her words and returned only the ruthless sound of the waters hitting the stones. The father tried to keep calm, but it was impossible. The heart beat out of step. The panting made the chest burn, and the mind was filled with gloomy images, as if projecting before the eyes the worst possible scenario. There was nothing that hurt more than the feeling of not having the power to rescue one's own child. It was like watching life vanish before you, without being able to move fate an inch. The two together screamed, begged, and in every glance exchanged, there was a mixture of fear and despair. The mother clutched her husband's arms, trying to find firmness, while convulsive sobs prevented her from breathing clearly. The father, in turn, took a few steps into the water, but the force of the current was devastating, as if it had been designed to repel any human attempt to face it. With each step taken, the mud sucked their feet. The icy water rose to their waist and dragged them back, showing that the struggle was uneven. It was like fighting an invisible enemy who did not rest and did not pity. Cries of despair echoed through the neighborhood, drawing the attention of some people further away, but there was no time. Every second was a deep cut in the soul of the parents. Every meter that the child was carried by the river was a piece of hope being torn off. Despair has this power. It dilates the perception of time and turns every instant into an eternity. And yet, even in this state of helplessness, there was the uncontrollable flame of attempt. The mother knelt in the mud, stretching out her arms towards the void, as if she could touch the child by the force of love. The father shouted disconnected words, orders that no one could fulfill, because there was no one who could defy the violence of the river. The scene was one of absolute pain. There were no more parents. There were only two broken hearts, two human beings who were reduced to the most cruel impotence. The river had no face, but it seemed to smile cruelly, mocking their despair. This powerlessness reveals a hidden truth that many avoid facing. No matter how hard we try to control life, there are times when it escapes our command, times when we are forced to face human frailty in its most naked form. No matter how much we love, how much we plan, or how much we fight, there are moments when all we have left is to scream, hope, and pray. The mother, with tears streaming down her face, felt a lump in her throat that seemed to suffocate. Her voice failed, but the will to save her son was so great that it made her insist on screaming, even without strength. The father, trembling, tried to look for alternatives in an environment where there was no way out. I looked at the rocks, at the branches, at the bank on the other side, but nothing seemed to offer a solution. It was like being stuck in a maze with no way out, with time racing against them. And what hurt the most was knowing that their son's life was at risk and that they, despite all the emotional strength, could not do anything. This desperate reaction, this cry without immediate response, is the representation of the impact that extreme situations have on our mind. It's as if the rational mindset has been ripped out of us and replaced by a raw, visceral instinct that just screams and runs. It is the body reacting to the revelation that what we love most is in danger. It is the soul being pushed out of its comfort zone without any warning to deal with a fear that has no name. This is the painful transformation, when the human being realizes that he is not the owner of the situation, but only a vulnerable participant in a greater journey, in which invisible forces decide the directions. The despair of parents is at the same time a demonstration of absolute love and paralyzing impotence. And in this contrast lies the essence of this part of the story. They were strong enough to face any adversity in life, but at that moment, life showed its toughest face, leaving them on their knees before the force of the water. It's an image that lingers, not just because of the immediate danger, but because of the cruel revelation it brings, that we are fragile, mortal, and unable to hold in our own hands everything we love. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter, because the panic and helplessness of this family speak not only of an isolated accident, but of something that we all, at some point, face. Situations in which what we hold most dear escapes our control. Situations in which we are forced to face the abyss between desire and reality. It is in this space that revelations emerge that are capable of marking us forever, because they show us the true measure of our vulnerability and, at the same time, of our capacity to love. Comments on, "I'm on this journey too." The dog, until then following everything with attentive eyes and instinct always on the alert, was the first to really understand the seriousness of what was happening. He needed no explanation, no words, no rational awareness of what it meant to be swept away by a current. The bond was enough, that invisible connection that had kept him glued to the child forever, as if he could feel every change in mood, every quickening heartbeat, every vibration that escaped from the fragile body. When the river grabbed the child violently and began to drag him away, there was no doubt, there was no pause, there was no consultation with anyone. The dog's body reacted before any human could react, as if time, for him, had accelerated at the very second when life needed an answer. The first sign was a bark. Not an ordinary joking or warning bark, not the cheerful sound of someone who wants a ball or a run across the lawn. It was graver, denser, a primal scream that tore through the air like an explosion. There was something different in that sound, something that immediately caught the attention of the parents, even plunged into panic. It was a bark charged with urgency, with despair, but also with determination. It was almost as if the animal had found the perfect language to say, "I saw it, I understood it, I'm going to do something." And each new, invisible syllable that came out of that chest was a hammer to the wall of fear, opening a crack for the possibility of reaction. He fired toward the shore. The paws beat against the wet mud and sank, raising splashes that mixed with the deafening noise of the current. The smell of clay rose like cold smoke, mixed with the green scent of crushed leaves and the mineral rust of water that crashed on the stones. Her eyes fixed on the child burned with intensity. There was no hesitation. Every muscle trembled with accumulated energy, prepared for the decision he was about to make. The low growl that escaped between his teeth was a mixture of fury at the threat and the instinct for non-negotiable protection, as if in the back of his throat lived an ancient promise that if one day it was necessary, he would be more than company. He would be a shield. Mom and Dad, overcome by panic, could not organize thoughts. Their bodies were paralyzed by impotence, but the dog seemed to possess an almost superhuman clarity. It ran forward, backward, forward again, scanning the river with an instinctive intelligence, as if trying to decipher the invisible enemy that was the force of the water. It whirled in short circles, its hair bristling, its ears standing, emitting sounds that were not just barking but cries of urgency that shot across the scene like arrows. The wind, once light, now cut the skin like a damp blade. The sunlight, which had been shining quietly for minutes, seemed to have hardened, revealing each droplet suspended like shards of glass. And that's exactly where the dog ceased to be just a companion animal. That being until then present in games, in moments of rest, in afternoons of walking, became a presence with purpose. There was no distraction. there was no innocence. There was only the absolute certainty that he should act. What manifested itself in that instant was the true meaning of the word instinct. Not just survival instinct, but protective instinct. It was as if the silent memories of the simple days, the sleeping child leaning against his back, the small hands curled around his neck, the synchronized steps in the yard, had shaped in him a kind of emotional map that now turned into technique. It was impressive, because what you saw was not just reaction. It was as if there was a clear mindset there, a conscious decision shaped by the invisible bonds built over so many shared days. The child did not have the strength to resist on his own. The parents, despite their courage and love, had no means of fighting the violence of the current. So it fell to the dog, the silent guardian, to take on the role of hero. And this moment reveals something great about dog loyalty. It knows no logic, no calculation, no probabilities. It's visceral. It is the purest translation of courage that exists when love meets an abyss edge. While barking, he moved closer and closer to the edge, even as his paws slipped on the wet clay. The body, however, remained firm, as if finding in the midst of panic an extra, almost supernatural energy. The eyes did not blink. He knew exactly where the child was, even when the foam of the water hid it for a few moments. The dog followed every movement of the current with a concentration that seemed otherworldly. It was as if he had been born for that moment, as if his entire journey there had been silent preparation for that choice. The shortened breath set the rhythm of the water. The tail, once restless, now remained rigid, functioning as an emotional rudder on the boundary between impulse and strategy. The father, still struggling to balance himself, looked at the dog and for the first time amid the chaos, realized that there was something different there, a force that did not come from reason, but from a deep love and an unshakable instinct for protection. He said nothing, but within himself he understood that perhaps salvation lay before his eyes, not in his own hands, but in the paws of that four-legged companion. The mother, in the midst of convulsive crying, also noticed the state of the dog. He saw in him not only an animal on alert, but a spark of courage that seemed to be laid by nature itself at the very moment when it was needed. And this silent recognition, crossed in the gaze between human and animal, redrawn the scene. It was no longer two adults and a dog watching a disaster. It was three lives, connected, deciding together, each in its own way, that fear would not be the only voice in that place. This moment has an extraordinary symbolic weight. The dog did not hesitate, did not assess risks, did not calculate chances of failure. He simply recognized the danger and responded with the immediate decision to protect. And this reveals a powerful truth. Courage is not born from the absence of fear, but from the strength of a bond so deep that it overrides fear. It was this invisible bond, forged in ordinary days, that now turned into heroic action. And it is at this point that life shows us its most surprising face. In those moments when everything seems lost, revelations appear capable of completely changing destiny. The decisions, the ones that really count, are those made in the inner silence in which no one applauds, but the heart knows why it chose. Barking continued to tear the air, mixed with the sound of the river and the desperate cries of parents. But there was something different about them now. They weren't just alarms, they were promises. The dog not only drew attention to the danger, he announced that he would do whatever it took. It was as if, in that instant, he had taken on a greater responsibility than anyone could have imagined. A kind of moral contract with the very idea of protection. Every bark was an "I will," every growl was an early no, every silence between one and the other was an "I know what to do." He brought the muzzle of the blade closer to the water and sniffed like someone deciphering an invisible map. The smell of the river brought mud, crushed leaves, the memory of recent rains, but underneath it all there was a particular and unmistakable trace, that of the child. It was as if that little perfume, mixture of skin and soap, was drawing arrows in the air. The dog tilted its ears, dug its paws into an exposed root and studied the direction of the flow, understanding without school and without mathematics that there would be no point in fighting the strongest line of the current. It would be necessary to cut the right angle, like someone crossing a busy street, waiting for the exact gap between two invisible cars. A second bark came out as confirmation to himself. The tail, which once vibrated nervously, now remained motionless in a posture of absolute focus. The chest rose and fell in short breaths, synchronizing with the harsh music of the river. The dog walked 3 steps to the left, as if looking for a point where the terrain would give him momentum, stepped back a little to win the race, tested the firmness of the ground with his nails. The mud gave way at the first touch, but there was nearby a flat stone half hidden under roots that looked like ancient fingers. He recognized it as a platform, as a springboard, as the place where the body would gain the right trajectory. The parents noticed this movement, and for an instant, panic gave way to trembling hope. The mother clasped her hands in each other, as if trying to hold her own heart so that it would not fall. The father, in a choked voice, called the dog by name, not to stop him but to give him courage. A short blessing, a silent permission. The dog responded with a look that wasn't an animal's asking for approval. It was a partner taking responsibility. And this look crossed the scene like a pact. No one would give up as long as there was air in the lungs and Rio ahead. The current roared louder, as if sensing the challenge. The river narrowed a little further, creating a corridor of rushing water that pushed everything to the center. There were small, treacherous whirlpools spinning near hidden stones. The dog mentally mapped each whirlwind, each bubble that exploded as a warning, each strip of foam that gave away a submerged step. He had no language to name any of it, but he had the body to understand it. And understanding with the body at that time was everything. The language of decisions, when life tightens, is often made of silences, of small adjustments, of choices without words. There was then a detail that seems minute, but that says a lot about choices. The dog spread its front paws a little wider than usual, lowered its head and closed its mouth, the posture of one who prepares for an impact. The tail stretched out like a rudder. The neck stiffened. It was the invisible choreography of commitment. The barking stopped. The silence for a second was heavy, almost material, as if everyone, parents, trees, stones, and sky, held their breath at the same time. Time, this demanding director, focused the camera on a single protagonist. A dog who, realizing the danger, decided that his journey would not only be company but shield, not only affection but action. And that is also why when the dog finally stiffens his body to launch himself, we are not facing an improvisation, but the result of a journey, a silent journey, built behind the scenes, in which love learned to dress in technique, and loyalty trained without realizing it, a map of action. There is emotional impact, of course, but there is also engineering of care, choosing the right point, aligning the body, using the diagonal of the water in your favor, avoiding the whirlpool, aiming not where the child is, but where he will be in the next second. All this without a spreadsheet, without apparent calculation, only with the intelligence of the heart translated into movement. Parents, immovable, see this reading happen. They can't translate, but they feel it. The mother notices that the barking has turned into silence and understands that it is calm before the definitive movement. The father, with his feet stuck in the mud, tilts his trunk forward as if in a useless and beautiful gesture. He could push the dog with his own desire. The water, cruel and magnificent, continues its thick music, but there is another music being born there, the music of intention, of decision that becomes gesture, of love that becomes act. The dog takes half a step back, measuring momentum. The muzzle points slightly against the current, the ears lie down to reduce resistance, and the skin on the back stretches like string about to vibrate. The world for a moment becomes a narrow corridor between what has already happened and what can happen. There are no guarantees. There are no safety nets. There is no manual. There is only a silent promise that everything that has been lived together so far will be put into practice with all the forces in the next movement. And it is exactly in that millisecond, in that fold of time where the big decisions live, that we understand the size of this revelation. Heroes are not born at the moment of the jump. They are forged in the routine that precedes the jump. He says, "I'm on this journey too." The body of the dog, until then vibrating in tension at the edge of the bank, turned into a living arrow. He threw himself into the river without hesitation, as if every muscle was born for that moment. There was no interval of doubt. There was no space of human calculation between risk and consequence. There was only the raw force of heroic decision. The water received the impact with violence, raising a short wave that opened in circles as if recognizing the entrance of an unexpected adversary. The sound was dry, but what was most impressive was not the noise of the jump. It was the absence of hesitation that preceded it. There was no choice, only answer. The courage of the dog was not born from the absence of fear, but from the presence of a bond so powerful that it erased any fear. The current tried to swallow the animal's body immediately, dragging it with the same ruthless force that had taken the child. But what set him apart was the mentality forged in the instinct of protection. The paws, in almost perfect sync, thumped against the water firmly, defying the liquid fury. Each stroke felt like a blow against fate. The mouth, closed, prevented the river from invading his lungs. The eyes, fixed in front, not only accompanied the foam, they followed the invisible line that connected his soul to that of the child. It was this line, and not just the nose, that guided him through the liquid chaos. The parents from the shore watched in amazement. Their hearts raced, not only for fear of losing their daughter, but also for the revelation they were witnessing. In that leap, they understood a hidden truth. Love knows no species, it knows no limit. It does not ask permission to become action. The transformation of an animal into a hero took place before his eyes, and this changed not only the immediate scene, but also the perception of what courage is. It was not just blind instinct. There was a decision there, a choice that carried weight and meaning. Every second inside the river, the dog seemed to be waging a battle on two fronts, against the physical current, which pushed him furiously away, and against the symbolic current, which reminds us that in the face of tragedy, most hesitate. He didn't hesitate, and this detail is what makes it memorable. It is in the framework of the decision, in that instant when everything could be lost, that the stories that transform mentalities are born. The dog's leap was not only physical, it was also a leap of consciousness, a deep dive into the territory of absolute loyalty. The icy water burned his body like tiny blades, but the protective instinct was stronger than the discomfort. The soaked fur was heavy, breathing became difficult, but none of this made him give up. Instead, he seemed to intensify his quiet fury. The low growl, muffled by the river, vibrated like a survival mantra. He was not just swimming, he was advancing as one who defies a greater force, as one who writes with his body a message of resistance. The contrast was striking. The impersonal, indifferent current against the singular force of a being moved by bond and decision. On the one hand, the blind brutality of nature. On the other, the concentrated courage of a protector. And in this disproportionate clash, a powerful lesson was revealed. It is often not the size of the force that defines the outcome, but the intensity of the determination. The father shouted the name of the dog, not in despair, but in recognition. It was as if that call was a seal, a confirmation that the animal was not alone in its struggle. The mother, with tears and sobs, shook hands as if in prayer. The two, unable to act directly, placed all their hope in that figure who swam against the impossible. And this is also revealing. When fear paralyzes, the courage of one can rekindle the faith of all. The dog moved forward, cutting the stream diagonally, using an instinctive intelligence that looked like pure mathematics. He did not follow the child directly. He understood with the accuracy of one who reads invisible signs where he would be in the next instant. This perception is not explained only by animal instinct. It is the result of something greater, of an invisible journey in which coexistence, affection, and trust have shaped a being to be ready exactly at that moment. It is the revelation that nothing happens by chance. Every simple gesture in the past has accumulated to generate strength in the present. And as we watch this scene, we are led to reflect on our own decisions. How often do we wait too long to act? How often do we let calculation win out over courage? The difference between hesitating and jumping is often what defines the line between loss and salvation. The dog, in his heroic act, shows us that there are times when overthinking is the greatest enemy of transformation. There are moments when only the leap makes sense, because it is he who keeps hope alive. The current roared, but he kept going. Every move was a hammer against logic, an affirmation that courage needs no guarantees to exist. The mouth sometimes opened between one stroke and another, revealing teeth clenched like blades, not of aggression, but of resistance. With each meter conquered, the dog approached closer than it seemed impossible. It was like saying with your body, I didn't come here to try. I came here to get it. And here's an essential point. Courage is not the absence of doubt, but the decision to move forward in spite of it. The hidden truth is that we all, at some level, feel the weight of the current of life. What sets us apart is the response we give. Some get carried away, others seek safe shores, but there are those who choose to swim against everything. The dog, throwing himself into the river, reminds us of this. He had no guarantees of victory, but he had such an intense purpose that he made any possibility of failure irrelevant. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because when we talk about the heroic decision of this animal, we are not just narrating a physical leap, but a revelation about the essence of what it means to act on behalf of something greater than ourselves. We are talking about impact, about choices that shape destinies, about moments when life demands that we leave the comfort of the sidelines to face the unknown. It is at this point that we understand. It is not the water that drags or fear that limits, but the invisible force of what we believe to protect. And when this force becomes greater than any current, the impossible ceases to exist. He said, "That makes sense to me." The current roared as if it were a soulful enemy, alive, cruel, and unforgiving, dragging away anything that dared to challenge its rule. It was as if the river itself had awakened from a deep sleep just to prove its strength in that instant. The dog, now immersed in the midst of that enormous battle, seemed small in the face of the vastness and brutality of the waters, but the energy emanating from his body betrayed something greater. He was not there to surrender. Every stroke was a blow against the impossible. Every thrust of his hind legs a silent declaration of war against the inevitability of nature. The water, cold, heavy, and turbulent, closed around him as if trying to swallow him, but there was a determination in him that did not fit into logical explanations. It wasn't just a survival instinct. It was something deeper, more sacred, a visceral response to the call to protect. The dog's gaze, even amid the white foam and murky darkness of the river, remained fixed on a single point. It was as if an invisible line connected him directly to the small body that a few meters ahead struggled uselessly against the current. There were no distractions. Branches beat against his back, stones scraped his paws, leaves stuck to his soaked hair, but none of this was able to divert him from his route. Each impact against the exhausted body was absorbed with an almost supernatural resistance, as if each blow was just another reminder that he had something greater to fulfill. And the more the current tried to subdue him, the stronger he seemed to become, as if within him there was a secret source of courage that only awakens behind the scenes of adversity. On the shore, parents watched in a trance between hope and terror. The father, seized by an almost irrational impulse, came to take a few steps into the river, but the violence of the water pushed him with such brutality that it almost knocked him down immediately. He had to cling to a branch to keep from being carried away, and in that instant he realized how impossible it would be to try to move on. His eyes, wet not only from rain and river water, but from despair, turned to the dog. The mother, between sobs and screams, called for her son with a pain that cut the air, but deep down she already knew the truth. There was nothing else she could do but trust. And that detail revealed a hidden and powerful truth. Salvation often doesn't come from where we expect it. It does not arise from brute force or logic, but from the silent loyalty that seemed banal in everyday life, and that, at critical moments, becomes a bridge to life. The dog swam with his head held high, his eyes burning like coals in the middle of a storm. Each movement seemed charged with meaning, as if each stroke was a word in a language that only the heart understands. He did not advance in a straight line, because he knew, on some mysterious level, that the current would push him away. Instead, he drew diagonals, dived at unlikely angles, emerged at strategic points, calculating with pure instinct every fragment of that invisible battle. It was an unequal confrontation. On the one hand, the ancestral brutality of a river that existed long before either of them. On the other, a seemingly fragile living being, but guided by love and courage. And it was this mindset that turned the game, because while the river acted without intention, the dog acted with purpose. The body was already showing signs of exhaustion. The heavy hair, soaked and glued to the body, added weight, while the panting breath came out in rapid gasps that could barely overcome the roar of the water. But none of that had the power to stop him. With each stroke, there was a silent and brutal reminder. Courage is not measured by the size of the forces, but by the intensity of the decision, and his decision was already made. The low growl that escaped from his throat barely audible amid the chaos, functioned as a mantra of endurance, an internal engine that drove his every move. It was striking to note how, at that instant, the dog was not just an animal driven by instinct. There was something beyond, something that seemed to push the boundaries of biology. He had options. He could, on some unconscious level, choose to retreat, to go back to the margin, to yield to the natural call of survival. But that wasn't an option for him. The only possible direction was forward. And this choice, this heroic decision, brought a revelation. True courage is born when love overcomes fear. With each meter gained, the scene became clearer to all who watched. It wasn't just a fight against water, it was a fight against the idea of impossibility. The dog turned every second of resistance into a symbol, every advance into a silent cry against giving up. The emotional impact was overwhelming because it made it explicit that when life demands it, even the improbable can materialize before our eyes. The initial barks, which had torn through the air like alarms, had now turned to silence. Not because he had given up communicating, but because all his energy was concentrated on swimming. Each muscle became an ally, each heartbeat an additional push against the current. The mouth remained closed, preventing water from invading it, but the eyes did not flinch, did not turn away, did not blink. There was an invisible beacon inside them, guiding him to the child. And here the reflection arises. How many times in our own battles do we look away from the goal because we let ourselves be seduced or intimidated by obstacles? The dog, on the contrary, showed the hidden truth. Staying focused is what sustains resistance even when everything conspires against it. The child, a few meters ahead, was already almost submerged. His frail arms flailed in despair, trying to cling to anything that offered support. But the river offered nothing but brutality. Still, there was a thread of hope, invisible to all but felt by the animal. It was as if each advanced meter was guided not only by instinct, but by a greater, almost spiritual force that connected their souls in the midst of chaos. The river roared, the parents screamed, but the dog swam, resolute, turning fear into movement, danger into challenge, uncertainty into courage. And now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this scene is not just about the physical struggle against the current. It is a true portrait of life itself. All of us at some point are thrown into rivers of chaos, confronted by forces that seem much larger than we are. And in these moments, the difference between being dragged or moving forward is not in the absence of difficulties, but in the willingness to transform instinct into purpose, fear into decision, vulnerability into courage. This is the hidden truth that the dog reveals to us. Real strength does not come from the absence of obstacles, but from the mentality of facing them with clarity and heart. He said, "That makes sense to me." The decisive moment was approaching, and the scene gained an almost unbearable tension. The dog, swimming against the current with the already exhausted body, finally reached the critical distance at which he could feel the proximity of the child, not only with his eyes but with his own instinct. The small frail body was already almost giving way to the waters, with its head sinking and emerging at short intervals, while its arms beat with a weakness that betrayed exhaustion. Every second, life seemed to slip away a little more, and it was on this thin thread between the end and hope that the animal threw itself with all its remaining strength. With a final thrust, the dog plunged steadily across the murky blade of the current and disappeared for an instant that seemed eternal. The father, mother, and any witnesses who had their eyes fixed on that scene felt their hearts stop. There was a brief silence, even with the roar of the river, because everyone understood that this dive was the moment of truth. And then, emerging from the foam, the dog returned to the surface with the child carefully clamped between its teeth. There was no brutality in his bite, just firmness and precision, as if he had calibrated every muscle of his jaw to hold without hurting, protect without letting slip. The scene was almost unbelievable. The contrast between the brutality of the river and the delicacy with which the dog carried the child created a visual and emotional impact that transcended any rational explanation. It was like watching a miracle built not by luck, but by courage and determination. The animal's eyes, still fixed and full of purpose, seemed to say that he would not rest until he got that little body to safety. The current, however, did not surrender easily. The additional weight of the child made each stroke slower, heavier, more suffering. The mouth needed to hold tight, but this required even more difficult breathing from him, since he could barely open his muzzle to inhale air. Still, he persisted, turning his own body into a living bridge between imminent death and salvation. The father and mother shouted on the shore, calling for their son, encouraging the dog, but deep down they knew that everything was in the pause and courage of this unexpected guardian. Every meter conquered felt like a century. The child, now semi-conscious, no longer struggled against the water, but his soft body still showed signs of life. Eyes closed, breathing almost non-existent, but there was a spark that kept burning, and it was this spark that the dog carried like a treasure. He swam diagonally, dodging branches, facing smaller eddies, always calculating the angle of return to the shore. It was as if a silent intelligence conducted his movements, a wisdom that depended not on logic, but on instinct, refined by loyalty. With each stroke, the weight seemed to increase. His muscles were already trembling, his lungs were begging for air, his body was begging for rest. But the mentality to give up simply did not exist. This was the hidden truth that the scene revealed. Courage is not the absence of limits, but the decision to move forward even when everything inside you asks to stop. The dog was no longer swimming with just his body, but with something bigger, an invisible energy, born of connection, bonding, and the silent decision not to fail. When it finally approached the shore, the parents launched themselves without thinking. The father entered as far as his legs would allow, almost being dragged away, but with a desperate impulse extended his arms towards the dog. The mother, kneeling on the edge, cried without being able to contain her despair, repeating her son's name in tears. The dog, even exhausted, remained firm until he felt that human hands were holding the child. Only then, with a last effort, did he push the small body forward, handing it over as one who fulfills a mission. The moment the child was pulled from the water brought a shock of reality. The father clutched her to his chest in despair, while the mother rushed to wrap her hands around her. It was a hug of pure relief, mixed with fear still present, but charged with hope. The dog, in turn, staggered when trying to get out of the river. His paws trembled, his eyes were half closed with fatigue, but there was something grandiose in that image. He did not need recognition, words, or gratitude. His presence was already the very revelation that loyalty can be more powerful than any barrier. There was crying, there was screaming, there was panting, and for a few seconds no one knew whether the child would survive or not. But the mere fact that she was back on the sidelines was in itself a miracle. The eyes of the dog met the eyes of the parents, and in that silent exchange was the confession of everything that had happened. A pact of trust, a surrender of life in favor of life. People watching from afar, unable to help, felt they were facing something greater than a simple instinctual act. It was like witnessing the transformation of the ordinary into the extraordinary, as if the backstage of reality had been revealed for a few moments to show that love, in its purest form, is capable of facing any current. The emotional impact was so profound that many, even without direct connection to the family, cried when they saw that scene. And if we look closely, we realize that this story is not just about a physical rescue. It's also about the metaphor of life, about how we all carry and are carried at some point. Sometimes we are the fragile child, without strength, needing to be supported by someone's love. Other times we are the dog, called to take on the burden of saving, even when it seems impossible. And understanding this is fundamental, because it shows us that life is made up of roles that alternate, of journeys that intersect, of decisions that are born in silence but echo forever. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what we see here is not only the triumph over the current, it is the revelation of how courage can manifest itself in the most unlikely moments, how the mentality of fighting for the other transforms situations of despair into stories that will never be forgotten. It's about choices, it's about impact, it's about the hidden truth that only reveals itself when all seems lost and yet someone decides not to give up. He says, "I'm on this journey too." The riverside scene did not end when the child was pulled from the water. On the contrary, it seemed that a new chapter began right there, in front of everyone. The father, kneeling, held his son with a force that mixed fear and hope, while the mother, between tears and sobs, touched the boy's wet face as if to assure him that he was still there, alive. The dog, exhausted, lay down on the damp earth, panting heavily. With his body covered with leaves and mud, but with his eyes still attentive, as if the mission had not completely ended. At that moment, neighbors began to approach. Some had run when they heard the screams. Others had been there from the beginning, paralyzed by the shock, and only now were they able to move. With each step towards the family, a reverent silence formed. No one was sure how to react, but there was something sacred about that scene. And then, what seemed contained turned into a collective explosion. Clapping, shouts of encouragement, applause that echoed like a spontaneous recognition, not only of the rescue but of what it represented. It was the whole community coming together around an event that would change everyone. One neighbor ran for towels, another brought blankets, a lady arrived with drinking water, and soon a small crowd formed, all collaborating in some way, all touched by the dog's courage. Some looked at the animal in disbelief, as if they could not believe that a being that many consider only pet could have taken on such a grandiose role. Children watched in silence, absorbing that invisible lesson, as if realizing, even without understanding in words, that they were facing a revelation about love and courage. That's when firefighters arrived, called in hastily by a neighbor who had called amid the chaos. Sirens cut off the air, and within moments the professionals were on the scene. Men and women accustomed to facing disasters and saving lives, but who now found themselves facing something that escaped the manual. They quickly assessed the child, applied first aid, and found with relief that despite being very debilitated, she was alive thanks to immediate intervention. The team leader, a steady-eyed man, summed up what everyone already knew. If it weren't for this dog, we would be here today for another reason. He saved a life. The words had an immediate impact. It wasn't just technical recognition, it was confirmation of a profound truth. The animal's action had been the difference between tragedy and hope. The community, already emotional, exploded again in applause, this time directed directly at the dog. He, however, remained lying down, breathing with difficulty, but with his head held high as if one understands in silence that he fulfilled the role that life handed him. Rescuers set up a small makeshift space, tending to the child, checking his vital signs, ensuring he was out of immediate danger. At the same time, some approached the dog, offered him water, checked that he was not seriously injured. The scene was powerful because it showed how even trained professionals, faced with that act, surrendered to respect and gratitude. And this created something rare, a union between all those present, as if each one had been touched in a personal and non-transferable way by what he had witnessed. More neighbors arrived every minute. Some brought cell phones, filming, recording that moment, not as curious but as witnesses to something that deserved to be remembered. Others simply approached in silence, crying, unable to contain their emotion. There was a collective feeling that everyone there was facing a transformation, not just of the family, but of the whole community. The dog had not only saved a life, it had awakened something dormant in people's hearts, the certainty that courage and loyalty have the power to move crowds. The father, still holding his son in his arms, raised his eyes to the dog and, in a choked voice, said loudly, "This dog is more than our friend, and he is our hero." The words crossed the space and were etched in everyone's memory. The animal, even without understanding the words, seemed to understand the tone, and wagged its tail slightly, as if accepting that title not out of vanity, but as a natural consequence of what it did. It is curious how, in such situations, collective perception transforms. Until minutes before, that dog was just part of everyday life, a common companion. Now he became a symbol, a reference, an inspiration. In the glances exchanged between the neighbors, there was a revelation. When someone, whether human or animal, stands up against the impossible, everyone else feels the vibration of that courage. And it makes a real impact. It changes mindsets. It makes people rethink their own decisions. One of the firefighters, still emotional, said something that was echoed. "Many times we are the ones who go into the water, who take risks, but today was different. Today we learned from him." That phrase ran through the group as a powerful reminder. Heroes can emerge from where we least expect them, and life's journey is filled with those behind the scenes where the hidden truth reveals itself without warning. The children in the neighborhood looked at the dog as if watching a real superhero. Some approached slowly, stretched out their hands, and the dog, even tired, licked their fingers gently. It was as if he wanted to say that everything was fine now, that the danger had passed. It further sealed the connection between everyone, creating a collective bond that would not be forgotten. And here there is something that we need to reflect deeply. This community reaction shows how individual courage, even born in silence, can expand in waves that reach far beyond the original action. The dog did not enter the water to be recognized, but the impact of what it did surpassed the moment and spread like flame on dry straw. It is so in our lives too. When we act purposefully, when we make decisions guided by loyalty and courage, we inevitably touch other people without even realizing it. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what we saw there was not just a child being saved and a dog being applauded. It was a revelation about how communities transform in the face of acts of bravery, about how the mentality of a single being can awaken an entire collectivity to the strength of love, loyalty, and hidden truth that exists within each of us. He said, "That makes sense to me." What happened after the rescue wasn't just immediate relief, it was the start of something even bigger. The dog, once only seen as a faithful companion of the family, was now celebrated as a true hero. The child, already in the arms of his parents, was safely wrapped in blankets and cared for by rescuers. But the eyes of all present, even in the midst of the cry of emotion and the frenzy of the moment, turned to that animal which, exhausted, rested on the ground with its chest rising and falling in heavy breaths. There was something almost sacred in that image, as if everyone understood, even without words, that they were facing a scene that would never be forgotten. Neighbors came up to stroke the dog. Some knelt before him, others just watched in silence as if any banal gesture could break the intensity of what was happening. The children especially looked on in awe, touching his soaked fur, feeling the vibration of his courage still pulsing like an echo. And the most impressive thing was that the dog did not seem to seek anything in return. There was no vanity, there was no explicit pride. His gaze remained serene, as if to say, "I just did what needed to be done." This purity caused the emotion to increase even more, because everyone knew that this act had been guided solely by the instinct of protection and unwavering loyalty. As the hours passed, the news began to spread throughout the city. Someone had recorded the scene with their cell phone, and before long the story came to life beyond the banks of that river. First, it was local social networks, then regional news sites, and soon after the larger media began to take an interest. Reporters arrived, photographers positioned themselves, and cameras began recording testimony. It was impossible not to want to tell and recount that feat. Media outlets carried headlines such as, "The dog that braved the current to save a child," or "Four-legged hero prevents family tragedy." The family, still in shock, welcomed journalists in front of their house. The father, in a choked voice, recounted the moment when he believed that he would no longer have his son in his arms. The mother, touched, said that she would never look at that dog the same again, because now he was not just a pet, but an inseparable part of the family history. Their every word reinforced what the entire community already felt. That dog had crossed the invisible line between companionship and heroism, showing that courage knows no kind. Local authorities have also spoken out. The fire department issued an official note highlighting that without the immediate action of the dog, the child would hardly have survived. Volunteer vets offered to examine the animal and ensure it had suffered no internal injuries, such was the concern of the community. It was as if everyone suddenly felt that they should take care of him in the same way that he had taken care of the child. This collective movement of gratitude created a transformative atmosphere. Neighbors who barely spoke to each other now shared tears, hugs, and stories around the feat. With the increasing prominence, it was not long before the national media appeared. Television channels aired special reports. Printed newspapers stamped pictures of the dog with emotionally charged headlines. On radio programs, commentators talked about the hidden truth that the scene revealed, that we often underestimate the depth of the connection between humans and animals, forgetting that they are capable of gestures that transcend what we call instinct. Experts were invited to analyze, psychologists commented on the emotional impact, and religious leaders spoke of miracles. Each angle reinforced the same message. There was something bigger behind that episode. The dog, oblivious to all this movement, received only what mattered most to him, the affection of the family and the community. He slept more soundly at night, surrounded by attention and care, but did not seem to understand that the world outside now saw him as a hero. And perhaps this was the greatest beauty of the story, the simplicity of someone who does not seek recognition, but who, for acting with purity and courage, ends up receiving immeasurable gratitude. And here, looking at this unfolding, an inevitable reflection arises. Recognition was not only about the act itself, but about what it aroused in people. It was as if everyone was forced to look within themselves and ask themselves, would I have the courage to throw myself against the current to save someone? This questioning, even if silent, had the power to transform mentalities. And this is what differentiates ordinary moments from extraordinary moments, the ability to provoke internal changes that extend far beyond the original scene. The media, always in search of impactful narratives, could have treated it only as a curiosity, but the reaction was different. Reporters described in detail the struggle against the current, the tension of the community, the relief of the rescue. They not only told what happened, but conveyed the emotional impact. And in this way, the story took on a life of its own, traveling through cities, states, and even countries, taking with it the image of an anonymous dog that suddenly became a universal symbol of courage and love. It's amazing how stories like this have the power to cross invisible boundaries. People who would never know the family or the animal, when reading or watching the reports, were moved, cried, shared the feeling of hope. It was as if the scene had the power to touch what is most human about us, the need to believe that, in the midst of chaos, there are still acts of purity that transform destinies. And when this happens, we realize that life is made up of unexpected revelations, capable of changing the way we look at everything around. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this collective recognition is not just about gratitude, but about how a community and even an entire society can transform in the face of an act of courage. When we celebrate someone, whether human or animal, we are not only acknowledging what has been done, but also projecting into ourselves the possibility that we are capable of something great. It is as if this type of story opens a mirror before our journey, showing us that even behind the scenes of everyday life, we carry seeds of heroism that can bloom at any moment. He said, "That makes sense to me." Each time the story was retold, something deeper revealed itself. It wasn't just about the record of a dog braving a current to save a child. It was, above all, a living reminder that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward even when everything seems to conspire against it. That scene, engraved in the memory of those who witnessed it and then shared to thousands of people, carried a symbolic force almost impossible to measure, because deep down, everyone who listened recognized themselves in that struggle, even if indirectly. We all have our own currents, our own turbulent rivers, and to see a four-legged animal plunge in without hesitation to save a life was like a mirror reflecting the silent battles we fight daily. What was most impressive was loyalty, without calculations, without reward strategies. The dog did not know that it would be celebrated, that it would make headlines, that it would become a topic in newspapers or television programs. He did not act for status, for fame, for recognition. He just acted, and that, in a way, put him in an even higher position than many human heroes we know, because his bravery came from a pure place, devoid of any vanity. It was a courage that sprang from the essence, from what we may call instinct, but which in this case seemed to go beyond the limits of instinct and touch what we call spirit. The scene invites us to think about something we often forget, that greatness can inhabit the most unexpected places. Heroes are not only on the covers of films, in storybooks, or on the stages of public life. Sometimes the real hero is sleeping on the carpet in the room, walking next to us during an ordinary walk, waiting for affection after any day. This episode showed, undeniably, that behind the scenes of life hides powerful revelations, and when we least expect it, a seemingly simple being can reveal an impact that can transform an entire community. The look of the child, after all, was perhaps the most striking part for the parents. Still wrapped in blankets, shivering, but with her eyes fixed on that dog that now rested next to her, there was an indescribable connection. It was as if, even without fully understanding what had happened, she knew that her life had been preserved by that four-legged friend. This connection would never be broken, because the memory of danger and salvation would be engraved not only in the mind, but in the heart of the whole family. And we, as we look at this scene, are invited to reflect. What really defines a hero? Is it the size of the risk faced, the intensity of the act, or is it the purity of motivation? When an animal braves the brutal force of a river to save a child, the answer seems clear. Heroes can indeed have 4 legs, they can act without measuring consequences, and they can, with a gesture of courage, redefine what we mean by loyalty and unconditional love. This story also leads us to question something deeper. How often do we underestimate the strength of the invisible ties that bind living beings together? We often treat living with animals as something secondary, as if they were just company or distraction. But at the moment when life is hanging by a thread, these ties show their true dimension. And then we understand that it is not just about living together, but about a shared journey, where every decision, every gesture, can reveal hidden truths about ourselves. The impact of all this is not limited to the act itself. It spreads like waves on a lake, touching other stories, inspiring other lives. People who may never have valued their pets so highly now look at them with a new respect, with a new gratitude. The transformation happens not only in the family that lived the drama, but also in each person who listened, who was moved, who reflected on their own way of facing life. Because that's what courage does. It not only solves an immediate problem, but it also plants seeds of change in the heart of those who observe. And the most interesting thing is to realize how such a simple decision can generate such grandiose effects. For the dog, there was only one possible choice: to save. There was no time to weigh risks, calculate chances, weigh consequences. There was only the action. And that decision, made in moments, became a legacy that crossed borders. This is the true essence of the heroic mindset: to act when life demands, even without guarantees, even without promises of reward. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this scene reveals to us something essential about our own journey. It shows us that courage is not an isolated act, but a posture towards life. That loyalty is not only presence, but commitment to the limit of forces, and that the impact of our choices can extend far beyond the moment we make them. The dog who saved the child did not know that he was writing a story capable of inspiring crowds, but he did. And this makes us reflect. How many times in our own lives do we have the chance to act with the same intensity and let it pass? Comments on, "I'm on this journey too." The image of the dog, still wet, panting next to the rescued child, was marked as an eternal portrait of what courage means in its purest form. It wasn't just an animal facing a river, it was a heart beating with the force of something that transcends instinct. It was the materialization of an invisible bond, of a loyalty that does not need to be taught, but that springs naturally from within those who live to protect. The episode was not limited to a physical rescue. It turned into a message capable of crossing borders, of touching people in different parts of the world, showing that there are gestures that, even born of silence and simplicity, have the power to echo as true revelations. The parents, still in shock, hugged the child as if trying to prevent any other risk from reaching him. But among the tears and sobs of relief, there was also the recognition of that unexpected friend. They stroked the dog with a gratitude that needed no words. The animal, for its part, did not seem to care about the attentive looks, the applause of the neighbors, or the cameras that were already beginning to record the scene. He just lay there next to the child, as one who naturally fulfills the mission to which he was called. And this naturalness is perhaps what excites us the most. The idea that greatness does not need a stage. It reveals itself in everyday life, in those moments when urgent decisions ask for more than simple presence. They ask for delivery. Days later, the story was already circulating in the local media, making headlines and gaining space on television programs. People were moved not only by the scene itself, but by the symbolism it carried. It was a reminder that true heroes can emerge from the most unlikely of places, that the impact of one brave act can transform the mindset of an entire community. The dog, now recognized as a hero, received care, affection, and even donations from people who wanted to ensure that he had a long and comfortable life. But more than that, he had become a symbol of faithfulness, a mirror for those seeking to understand what it really means to be there for someone in times of danger. And it is curious how, behind this episode, there is a hidden truth that we often let slip. Courage is not an exclusive attribute of great deeds, but a decision that can be made in every detail of life. When a dog rushes against the force of the current without measuring the consequences, It reminds us that deep down, the essence of courage is to act with the heart. And this is the kind of transformation that goes beyond the instant of rescue, because it invites us to look within ourselves and ask, what moves us when life demands immediate action? This episode also makes us reflect on how we see the bonds we cultivate. Many believe that animals only accompany us, but in practice, they teach us daily. They taught there before all that faithfulness is not only to stand by, but to throw oneself into danger, to defend what is sacred. They taught that decisions made in seconds can have an impact that can change destinies. And they showed us that heroes do not need speeches, because the strength of their attitude speaks louder than any words. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this story is also about us, about the choices we make on a daily basis, about how we react to our own currents. The dog did not hesitate because his mentality was focused on life, and this makes us think about how many times we stop acting because of fear, doubts, or uncertainties. There is a powerful revelation here. Courage and faithfulness are not measured only in the size of the challenge, but in the willingness to respond with truth and heart to what life asks of us. And when that message comes to us, it doesn't come as a simple newspaper report. She arrives as an invitation to rethink our own journeys, to assess whether we are willing to swim against the rough waters when necessary, or whether we prefer to retreat to the safe shore. And this reflection is not only individual, it is collective. Because just as the community rallied around that family, so too do we as a society need to learn to recognize and value the acts of loyalty that often go unnoticed behind the scenes of everyday life. At the end of the day, the dog who saved the child, swept away by the current, not only rescued a life, he reminded us of the true meaning of courage and fidelity. He showed us that heroes can have four legs, a sincere look and a sharp instinct, and that behind every seemingly simple gesture, there can be a force capable of transforming destinies. And perhaps that's the biggest lesson, that we don't have to wait for big stages or big wars to reveal our bravery. Sometimes it is enough to be present, act at the right time and offer the best of ourselves when life asks. If this story touched your heart, leave your like, subscribe here on the channel, and share this video with someone who loves dogs. Because when stories like this spread, they don't just thrill, they inspire. And together, we can keep alive this flame of hope and recognition for all the four-legged heroes who walk silently by our side every day. He said, "That makes sense to me." And if you made it this far, it's because this story spoke to you in some way. It makes sense to continue this journey together. Subscribe to the channel so as not to miss the next contents. Each video is thought to bring something of value and reflection, always in the same line of emotion and truth. And since you stayed with me until the end, leave there in the comments the phrase, "I'm with you until the end," because that way I know who really shares this same journey with me. Take advantage of it too and leave your like, not only as a gesture of support but as a sign that this message made sense to you. And look, there is a video here on the side that complements this subject. Click and continue with me there. I'm sure you will be involved as much as you were involved in this one today.